There are a total of 20 new Spirit Ashes in this Elden Ring DLC, and we are going to be ranking all of them from worst to best. Now, I had no intention of actually making this video because I just don't play with Spirit Ashes like ever. I have nothing against their existence, I just don't play with them personally. I have hundreds of videos on this channel dedicated to Elden Ring, and this is going to be the first Spirit Ashes video that I make, due to very popular demand. Like, I had lots of people requesting this video, so we're just gonna do it. And honestly, I'm glad that I did actually get to play with these, because there's lots of really cool and interesting stuff tied behind these Spirit Ashes that I'm going to share with you guys today. So yeah, let's just get started. Starting off at number 20, we have the FINGERCREEPER Ashes. Now for 55 FP, you summon this small little FINGERCREEPER dude that performs just exactly how you think. Doesn't really do that much damage, doesn't really have that much health. Not the most aggressive thing in the world either. The fact that he is really small and lower to the ground might mean that a lot of enemies could just end up missing him. Some attacks could just go straight over its head, but it's obviously not going to be doing that much damage. Doesn't even really serve as that well of a distraction either. And it is pretty squishy, especially if you go up against an enemy that does do fire damage. Because obviously these enemies being weaker to fire damage, they get this whole like animation that does damage over time and they start like rolling around on the ground. It's just not good. But the unique thing about this Ash is that it can heal the player character, of which it actually does use the heal every now and then. But the problem is that the heal is not very good. It heals you for like 100 or so HP, and it has a very small AoE. You basically have to be standing right next to the finger just to benefit, and you can't like walk into the AoE to actually benefit off the heal, which it wouldn't be too bad if he just constantly followed you around and spammed heal. But it doesn't really work that way. There's plenty of times that it just like walks around, does a whole bunch of nothing, or just like attacks an enemy and does like next to no damage. So as a healer, he's not going to be that good. And there are other Spirit Ashes that can also heal you that you probably see on this list that could just do the same thing but better as well. Number 19, the Spider Scorpion Ashes. Now, if you're a person that is like afraid of like these bugs, insects, and creepy crawlies, then this Spirit Ash is going to be doing more damage to you than it actually is the enemy. Like, they're very creepy to look at. I hate these guys. And unfortunately, they suck as a Spirit Ash as well, because it does like summon the smaller version of the Spider Scorpion, of which this one is not that aggressive, doesn't really do that good of damage. Now it does get a poison attack, but it's only when it attacks with its tail. It doesn't actually get poison when like it starts biting things or hitting it with its claws. And it rarely ever attacks with its tail. And there's going to be other Spirit Ashes that you'll see on this list that just proc poison faster and more consistently. Now it actually is going to be very cheap, only at 31 FP cost. But like with Spirit Ashes being like a one-time use thing, it doesn't really make much of a difference. Number 18, the BLOODFIEND HEXER Ashes. Now, this is going to be the only one that actually does consume HP out of all the DLC Ashes, but for 500 HP, it does summon a BLOODFIEND HEXER, of which this is just a big, giant buffoon, has terrible AI. He's a really big and massive target that gets staggered very easily. Like, he has like no poise. He's going to get staggered by every attack. Doesn't really have that much HP as well. All of his like melee attacks are pretty slow, have terrible hit detection. They just like end up missing so many times. And when enemies end up getting a bit further away from him, he'll just end up spamming the projectile attack that he gets with the BLOODFIEND Spear. And this projectile is going to be a bleed-based AoE explosion. Actually can do some decent amounts of bleed buildup, so he can be one of the better ones to proc bleed. But the thing is, this AoE explosion is so slow that even if the enemies are like the slightest bit mobile, they're just going to dodge it every single time. And like the worst part is that he's like committed to using this terrible attack that he knows sucks. Like, if you've missed an attack 10 times in a row, you'd think to change up your strategy, like do something different. Help me out here. What are you doing? Just sitting at the back of the arena doing a whole bunch of nothing. Number 17, the Manfly Ashes summons 3 separate Manfly Ashes, of which these guys are just not that good in terms of their damage. They actually end up spamming a lot of these like grabbing attacks, which obviously are only going to work against NPCs. So maybe against NPCs, they can be pretty good, but every single time they use a grab attack against any other type of enemy, it's just going to be a waste of time and just like no damage being dealt. They also don't really have much health and they can just die very quickly, but the major benefit of them is that they can proc poison. If all 3 of them are using that projectile attack, it is just going to proc poison very quickly. So it could have a use there, but it's not like it's really that hard to proc poison by yourself anyway, with so many different sources in this game. And poison is going to be one of the weaker status effects too. Now this Ash is going to be the cheapest in terms of FP cost compared to all of the other DLC Ashes, so that does help a little bit, but it's still not that good. Number 16, the Inquisitor Ashes. It actually does summon 2 separate Inquisitors, and both of these guys are very passive. There'll be lots of time where they're just standing around. But when they actually do something, it's actually pretty good. They can actually buff themselves to do more damage. Unfortunately, this like buffing attack is not an AoE, so it doesn't actually buff the second Inquisitor, nor does it buff the player character. actually does get a somewhat decent heal, and thankfully this one actually is an aura type of buff, so it actually does heal both Inquisitors and the player character. Now unfortunately they actually rarely use this heal. Like, you think between both of them it would happen a decent amount, but no, like one of them uses it like once a minute, and it rarely ever happens. Most of the time they just spend like walking back and forth and using the fire breath attack, which the fire breath attack is pretty decent. It can stun lock smaller enemies, it can do some nice damage, but like if they were just more aggressive and just did more stuff, that would just be better. Number 15, the Black Knight Andreas. This is actually one of 2 Black Knights that you can summon. This one actually does have a shield and hammer, of which can do some guard counters with like a massive AoE explosion attack. Very similar to what we have when we acquired the Black Steel Great Hammer. But the difference being is that his attacks are like way slower. It's like the only instance of which when we get the weapon, it's better than what the enemy has. And you'd think with like the shield that he has, it might like improve its survivability. But no, he rarely even blocks with the shield that much, and he is just like a lot more passive than the other Black Knight. And being that he's not really moving around as much and not attacking as much, he's just going to take a lot more damage in the meantime. If he did just constantly like turtle up, hold onto the shield the entire time, and primarily just do guard countering attacks, then he would be pretty good, but unfortunately it doesn't really work that way. Number 14, CURSEBLADE MEERA. This is an Ashe that can proc bleed with its spinning attacks that it gets while jumping around all over the place, so actually can be a somewhat more mobile type of Spirit Ashe that is harder to hit, although if enemies do hit it, it is going to take a lot of damage and it's going to get staggered very easily. This thing has practically no poise, but it can be somewhat aggressive, although there are times where you do just catch it lacking and just sitting still doing nothing. And it can proc some amounts of bleed pretty quickly, although there are going to be some types of Spirit Ashes that you will see on this list that can just do it better. I feel like if you had a bit more health and some more poise, I'd probably like him a bit more, but there are just other Ashes that can just outclass this one. Number 13, the GRAVEBIRD Ashes. Now, these guys are like super aggressive. They're just like constantly attacking. It's probably like the few instances of which you actually get a Spirit Ashe that is like more aggressive than the enemies that you actually fight. These guys can jump around, shoot out a bunch of these Ghost Flame projectile attacks, hit you with a bunch of their like pecking attacks they get with their beak, and they actually can do some nice amounts of damage. Now, the problems is that it does get staggered very easily, and it is a very large target. Even though it can like jump and fly around, it's still going to be relatively easier to hit them, and every single time they do get hit, it's going to result in a stagger and then potentially like collapsing to the ground, and they do not get iframes when they're on the ground trying to stand back up again, but their constant aggression can definitely be an upside. Number 12, Fire Knight HILDE. This is just going to be like a pretty decent Spirit Ashe overall. Gets okay amounts of poise, gets some good damage, some okay amounts of aggression as well. It is going to be a predominantly fire-based types of Spirit Ashe, so going against enemies that are weaker to fire, this could probably be one of the better options to use. All the attacks can do some decent amounts of damage. Also gets like lots of mix up with certain types of spells and some like Ashes of War that it could use. That can also hit pretty hard. Does actually get blocking frames of certain types of attacks, so it can trade out nicely. But overall, there are going to be better Ashes out there that just have more poise, can do more damage, are going to be more aggressive, and potentially just have more health too. But there are going to be certain circumstances to where this one can shine. Number 11, Black Knight Hugh. I consider this guy to be the better of the 2 Black Knight Spirit Ashes, purely because this guy has this ultra aggression, can jump around all over the place, continuously hit with these insane like twin blade combos, and also can use Crucible Wings. Now, the damage of this guy is not going to be anything too crazy, but like the stun lock potential and the constant aggression can be very good. Also does have some amounts of poise where it can trade out and tank some types of attacks. But I feel like for the most part, there are other Spirit Ashes out there that can just also do this, but just better, and potentially proc things like status effects. Because like all these Spirit Ashes, they just don't really do that good of damage. So the ones that can proc statuses is just always going to be better because they can just do percentage damage, which I'm just going to prefer more. Number 10, DEMI-HUMAN Swordsman YOSH. Now, this guy doesn't really do anything too amazing, but he's just like super fun to fight with. This is a cool little monkey that can like jump around all over the place. Obviously very reminiscent of Yoda, but he's very small, not that much health, can get staggered easily, but he can bounce back up and get back into the fight pretty quickly too. His attacks can also be very high damaging and can stun lock nicely. He's actually somewhat aggressive too. He could actually use with maybe a little bit more aggression, but overall like the smaller stature that he does have is going to work as a benefit in most cases. And he's not going to really get in your way as much if you're trying to fight alongside with him, which is also another bonus that he does have. But if you're trying to leave him alone in a 1v1 fight, he's going to lose pretty quickly. Number 9, the Mesmer Soldier Ashes. Now these guys, when I look at them fight, I just get annoyed because I just like picture myself fighting them. Like 2 of these guys just fighting you is like super annoying because they actually get some poise, they're ultra aggressive, they can stun lock you with their crazy ass attacks, and they're just doing that to the boss. And especially against smaller enemies, it can just be a very nice stun lock. They actually have some attacks that can knock enemies backwards too. Their damage isn't actually too bad. That is a very solid overall Ash, and there's going to be 2 of them. Now, the major problem is that they're not going to have much health. Like, they're still regular, basic enemies. And with certain types of attacks, they can just get melted. So I do recommend pairing them alongside a build that can utilize healing types of spells, just to try and keep them at max health and to keep up the aggression. Because if they do get caught up in certain types of combos, they're going to die really quickly. Number 8, the Divine Bird Warrior ORNIS. This is basically everything that you really want in a Spirit Ash. Just lots of poise, decent amount of health, constant aggression, really good damage, and actually does get projectile attacks while just flying in the air. Like, you just get everything that you really need in a Spirit Ash just right here. The only thing that's going to stop me from putting it higher on the list is because I liked the regular Horned Warrior Ashes just a little better because he also works somewhat similar but just does more damage. The benefit of this guy is that he can fly around a lot more and actually can shoot projectiles. So when going up against bosses that are probably more airborne, or if you just require your Spirit Ash to just be more out of the way, then this one could just be better due to its like flying and jumping attacks that it gets. So yeah, with this Spirit Ash, you can't really go wrong. Number 7, Fire Knight QUEELIGN, and this guy is going to be an NPC summon, therefore he's just going to be really good. All NPC summons are just going to be amazing because they're constantly aggressive, they get a dodge roll iframe, they can like input read and dodge attacks accordingly, which is very nice. They feel like they play with at least somewhat amounts of intelligence. Although you will catch them in instances where they're just being completely stupid and just hanging back and doing a bunch of nothing. This guy does fight with a spear and he does spam the weapon skill so many times, of which actually does do fire damage. So if you are going up against enemies that are weaker to fire damage, I would throw in this guy because he actually will do very nicely. Like in most cases, you obviously would want to use the Mimic tier, but if you don't have a fire build and you go up against a fire dude, you can just throw him on and it's going to work perfectly fine. Like there are going to be better NPC summons as we will get into, but he's definitely not a bad one. Number 6, SWORDHAND of Night JOLAN. This is going to be another NPC summon that actually can wield the Sword of Night, which is a bleed-based weapon, and you can spam the skill so many times, which can proc bleed relatively quickly. So having an NPC summon that does have access to bleed is obviously going to be amazing, because if you have a build that doesn't utilize bleed, that means your Mimic tier is not going to be using bleed, where this guy can. And bleed is obviously amazing in this game. Now, it's not going to go higher on the list because there is literally another summon in this game in JOLAN and Anna that has this exact person with another NPC summon. Now, it is going to consume like an additional 50 FP, but as I mentioned before, FP cost with Spirit Ashes doesn't really mean much because they're kind of just one-time use things anyway. And there are plenty of ways to like increase FP to help you use these Spirit Ashes, so it's not going to be that big of a deal. Number 5, the Horned Warrior. This is a big boy that gets lots of poise, constant aggression, actually gets the ability to knock enemies backwards and stun lock these smaller ones too, and it gets bleed. Now, it specifically gets bleed on this one flurrying attack that you see on screen right here. Just this one attack that he gets, that also gets like lots of hyper armor too, is just going to proc bleed. The entire combo can actually do over 500 bleed in total, which is honestly amazing. Almost every single boss is just going to get bled out in this one combo, if they can be bled out, that is. So if you are going up against enemies that cannot be bled out, I probably wouldn't bother with this guy and I'll just go in a different direction. But this guy is just a good tanky summon that can do high damage. Number 4, the BIGMOUTH Imp Ashes. This just summons a small little cannon guy that just shoots out a bunch of cannons all the time, and they're just great. They're like the highest damaging amounts of cannons. They're not going to do like amazing stance damage either. Like no summons do good stance damage. They always do like 2 or 3. So that's not going to really make much of a difference. But the major benefit of this guy is going to be its knockback potential. When you're fighting these smaller enemies that can get sent flying, it is just an absolute cheese. Like, look at what it's doing to Millennia. Like, this entire fight is just completely trivialized because there's this constant projectile attacks that actually travel on a flat line very quickly from like one side of the arena to the other. Like, he doesn't even need to be close to the enemy. He can just sit at a safer distance. He's not going to get in my way. I can just constantly fight this boss while they're getting peppered by a bunch of cannonballs. Now, even if you are fighting these enemies of which are not able to get sent flying and knocked backwards, it's just going to be passive damage. You don't really have to worry about the boss like going back and forth between you and your summon. So if you just don't like that style of gameplay, then this could just be like one of the best summons to use. Number 3, TAYLEW the Golemsmith, an absolute tanking machine. Like, this guy can just straight up just trade out with bosses and potentially even like 1v1 fight bosses as long as you actually have healing spells to complement. It is going to be a large guy with lots and lots of poise. That actually has some attacks that can do some nice damage, specifically the projectile ones. They can hit pretty hard. And yeah, he just has lots of defenses. He actually has small amounts of health, but like lots of defenses, because the whole gimmick of this fight, or this Spirit Ash, or this enemy in general, is that you have to hit them from the back and like stagger them and then get the critical attack. But obviously bosses don't really work that way. But the benefit of having an enemy with small amounts of health and large defenses is that you can heal them up very easily. Like, look at how much health they're being healed for when I'm using Erdtree heal. It's like almost the entire health bar back again. And I can just sit there and just watch him solo the entire fight. This is probably like the best tank-based Spirit Ash in the entire game, purely based on this one fact, that it has high defenses and low health. You can heal it so easily. It's great. Number 2, Ancient Dragon FLORISSAX. This is another NPC Spirit Ash, which obviously is going to be really good because they're going to be constantly aggressive, using good attacks, spam things like weapon skills that could do high amounts of damage, get iframe dodging, they're good at reacting and moving to certain types of like projectile skills. And if they ever get like knocked back and sent flying by certain types of attacks, they actually get iframes when they're standing back up again, which is something that a lot of other enemies don't have. They don't really get iframes when standing back up. But one thing you do have to worry about when using NPC summons is grab attacks. Like, if they get hit by grab attacks, it's just a GG, because they're like just not going to be able to dodge them. But the reason why FLORISSAX is so good is because they use the Flowerstone Gavel. The Flowerstone Gavel has a skill that debuffs enemies that makes them take more lightning damage. Now, normally, this weapon does not have good synergy with other types of faith builds because it's an arcane-based weapon. So if you have a faith-based build or a dexterity build that utilizes lightning damage, you can just use this summon. They will use the skill more likely than not at the beginning of the fight, and that's just going to be 12% more damage. If they use it fully charged, that's 15% more damage to your lightning sources, and they can keep spamming it over and over again, and you're just going to get constant damage. And it's a debuff, so it is going to stack with all of your buffs that you have. But it doesn't even just end there with this Spirit Ash. They also get a plethora of like just amazing attacks, like this really cool Dragon Claw lightning attack. Why don't we have this? I want this one. Now, it also does use the FLORISSAX Dragon Bolt spell, which is going to be a damage negation spell in an aura. So it actually does give you an aura buff for this boosted damage negation and a boost to your guard blocking abilities. Now, one thing to keep out for is that if you're using Golden Vow, this is going to overwrite that. So you're going to be losing out on that damage if they use this buff near you. So if you have a build that centers around Golden Vow, I would stay away from them. But sometimes they can just use it next to you, which can be a bit of a downside. But that's going to be like the only problem with this summon. Number 1, JOLAN and Anna. This is basically a portable gang squad. You get to summon 2 NPCs that are going to be hyper aggressive, that have good weapons. Like, they both get bleed based weapons. One has a Sword of Night, one has the Claws of Night. These weapons are going to be doing split magic damage. They're going to get bleed. These attacks are going to go through shields as well. So if you do fight shielded enemies, which is very far and few, it is going to help you out there. One of them is going to get projectile attacks. So that's also going to be very good. But like, these are just NPC summons that are ultra aggressive and are going to proc bleed very quickly. Like, this is kind of just broken. This is probably like this better to have than the Mimic tier. This is like summoning 2 NPC summons, but just without the boss just gaining more health. Like, the only downside that I can say is that they probably will get in your way more cases than not. Like, if you want to strafe certain types of attacks, they'll probably just block your path. And obviously, if you fight bosses that do a bunch of grab attacks, it's just going to be a problem too. But it's just going to be an NPC summon, so you have to worry about them not being aggressive. You have to worry about them doing bad attacks because they don't really have bad spell options. If they get knocked down, they're going to get iframes for when they actually stand back up again. And obviously, it's going to get amazing stun lock potential too. So yeah, if you have a build that doesn't really utilize things like bleed, especially if you're a mage build, you can just summon these 2 guys out there. They'll constantly stun lock, proc bleed, and you can just pepper them with your spells, and it will just make for an incredibly easy experience. Anyway, that concludes the list. As always, please do let me know what your opinions are down in the comments below. It was my first time making a Spirit Ash video, so like, let me know how it went. Also, please do like and subscribe because I do have a bunch more videos coming out along the way. Next one is probably going to be all of the unique skills ranked. There are like over 50 unique skills across these Sombra-based weapons, and we're going to be ranking all of them from worst to best. So definitely do subscribe for that one. And also do follow me on Twitch as well, because that's where I do all of my testing. And we're kind of like almost done with the testing, so we might end up starting doing some challenge runs soon. So definitely follow me there. Anyway, catch you guys around. Bye.